The Temple Studio is available for all of your recording, mixing, and mastering needs, whether it's on location or via internet file exchange. Located in the San Fernando Valley, the Temple has 40 physical inputs for live ensemble tracking and a production team with over 30 years of experience. To book time, call 213-840-1770 or email tchadt@me.com. Welcome to the Dive Bar Rockstar Podcast, a show exploring the lives of professional musicians of all types, touring musicians, recording artists, songwriters, engineers, bar bands, wedding bands, and anyone making their living in the music industry. Whether you've dreamed of being a professional or you already are one, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Eric Baines, and I hope that you not only find some entertainment here, but also some helpful tips, trade secrets, and ideas that will help you achieve your dreams. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm really excited about the guest today. She is a bass player, incredible singer, songwriter, an orchestrator / arranger, and a musical director. So she wears many hats, has many titles, as many of us do and wear, because it's kind of what's required to make a living a lot of times in this crazy music business that obviously right now is significantly slowed. But we're getting through it. She's also a fellow Berklee alum, although she graduated, something I failed to do. And she's played with some of my favorite bands, like Five for Fighting and Vertical Horizon and Air Supply. And she's also played with Rita Wilson, Denny Lane, Peter Asher, Terry Sylvester, Chuck Negron, Julianne Hough, and many more. You can check it out on her website. She was also in the band called Las Chicas, and that was a house band for a Mexican TV show called Noches Con Platanito, which you have to check it out on YouTube. It's kind of indescribable. It's basically a talk show hosted by a guy in a wig and a clown face. So it's unbelievable. I would highly suggest checking that out on YouTube. And right now she's working on a record with Billy Sherwood from the band Yes. So please enjoy my conversation with Jennifer Jo Oberle.
Awesome.
Well, let's start with the Billy Sherwood album. How did that all happen, and how did you guys meet?
This is hilarious. Sean Weitzman, who works for Arturia, invited me to see Yes at the Ford Amphitheater a couple of years back, and after the show, we ended up, meeting everyone in the band, and I met Billy that night. And we kind of hit it off, and also he found out about my my tribute to Kate Bush.
Oh,
so,
cool!
Yeah, so that was like the main connection that was happening, and he heard my voice, and he said, "Well, listen, I have this project, and I need a singer for And then like a couple of weeks later, I did one track, and the other guy that's in the band, Sepand, from Days Between Stations, he liked the track, so I ended up being the lead singer for this project, and it was so strange, but it was awesome. Cool. It was really cool because Billy writes a lot for Yes as well, and he has a long history with Yes.
Right.
Dates back from the 80s, and he was Chris's pick to to
carry on the legacy.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So, Billy is a super talented guy. And he wrote a lot on the project. And, the vocals I had to sing were very much like, John Anderson.
Very cool.
Very straight, hardly any inflections. Mm-hmm. And it was just a really awesome experience. There was a lot of, harmonies, a lot of layers, a lot of, off time stuff that you would hear on a record. So yeah, it's like, it's kind of my intro to Prague.
Wow, that's very cool. I saw Yes actually in Worcester when I was at Berkeley, like 1991. He wasn't on it. It was the tour where they had all the original guys, like Trevor Rabin and Steve Howe and
yeah, Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, and Howe, and what, Alan White.
Yep. Yeah.
Was it the Union tour?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that in Worcester, Mass.
I saw that in the Meadowlands in New Jersey.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Those are great.
It's so good.
And now to be, I mean, that's such a great story right there. Anyway, you went to a concert and you got a gig, that's pretty cool. That's like a dream come true kind of thing.
Yeah. And it was really surreal. It was extremely surreal. And we called it the settlements because we were all going through our divorces at the same time. Oh, that's
hilarious.
Yeah. And, I just wanted to say too, it was my intro to performing in a Prague situation. Like, I did a lot of the Rush tributes that you would see in, the jams, but this is kind of legit, it's
right.
Real, So it was super exciting, and my voice sounds very different than what I would normally do on other kinds of gigs. So yeah, it was really, it was a special experience. I'm grateful.
And where did you record?
I recorded in Billy's studio. Yeah.
Here in LA.
Yeah, here in LA. Yeah.
That's cool. So you just did you play any bass on it or just singing?
No, I just sang. But the intention is for me to perform, playing and singing, which will be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Very.
You think that's kind of freeing sometimes to be able to put the bass down and just sing?
Oh, definitely. Especially when I was doing the Kate Bush tribute.
Yeah.
It's a very demanding position to be a lead singer, especially when you're singing Kate's stuff. Yeah. And I've done a lot of other tributes. I sing a lot of No Doubt stuff. And when I'm working with that band, I have someone else play bass while I sing. It's great to do it all, but what I find is that just because you could doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's much more, I mean, for me as a singing bass player as well, it's like, it's much more enjoyable to do one or the other sometimes. It depends on the style of music for sure. But like, cause in a way it's like the bass is pulling you one way with your brain is to be very with the groove and on beat. And then your voice wants to kind of go other places. And it's a very, I don't know what you would call that, but it takes your brain and twists it up a lot, and sometimes that could be fun. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, I could be such a better singer if I wasn't playing, and I could be such a better player if I wasn't singing, Yeah,
it definitely requires a lot of focus. I know that my approach to playing bass too is all about listening. So if I hear something that's somewhat distracting or something that I need to navigate as a bass player, it's going to take away from my vocal.
Right, exactly.
And unfortunately in LA, there are so many, I mean, I am grateful to have so many different projects and so many, hats to wear. Mm-hmm. But because of that, the chances of me doing the same gig a couple of times a week, it's unlikely, Right. Yeah. So I end up working with a lot of different people. It's always a random kind of situation. So I'm getting used to these new players. I'm feeling how they play. I feel how their time is. And, there's a lot of, balancing that needs to happen when I'm singing and playing,
Right, for sure. So who were some of your favorite bassists like coming up?
Oh, coming up.
Well, whenever from when you started playing bass and paying attention to it, because, I mean, bass is one of those things that kind of gets lost until you start to play it and you're like, oh, now you can hear it in all the records. And like, now you're focusing on it. Like who did you hear first and like really enjoy their playing?
Oh, wow. Well, when I first started playing, I was dating a blues guitar player. So I was all about, Edgar and Johnny Winter.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember one of Johnny's bands were the rhythm section for Double Trouble. I think that the bass player was Tommy Shannon, right? Was that his name?
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah,
And
I'll
then,
look it up and correct it if it's wrong.
Okay, that would be great. And then, I was a huge Edgar Winter fan. And I listened to his records, the White Trash records. I don't know if you're familiar.
I'm not super familiar, but I'm going to go check them out now that you've brought it up.
They're so killer. They are so killer, especially the live album, which is called Roadwork, and it's with Rick Derringer and yes. Johnny's got a spot in it. And they do a killer version of Tobacco Road. And the bass player on that is a guy named Randy Joe Hobbs. And the guys I used to play with in Brooklyn, they were all blues guys.
Gotcha.
They were all about they were all into old school stuff. And self-taught, so we were all about jamming.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the first bass players I got into. But then I was always a big fan of music. I had a huge record collection. I lived around the corner from Zigzag Records, one of the popular record stores in Brooklyn back in the day. And I had a huge collection. So I would just play to records, right? So, I would play to the Motown stuff. And then later on, I found out it was James Jamerson. And then I was a huge Aretha Franklin fan. So I would, listen to a lot of Jerry Jamot, Chuck Rainey. I think his name is David Hood, I think it's David Hood. And then, of course, the Police. I was a huge, and I'm still a huge Sting fan. And Rush, Geddy Lee, so my favorites are all over the map. And I know I'm going to regret not saying someone like, of course, Paul McCartney,
right.
John Paul Jones, Chris Squire, John Entwistle. I was all about all of those players, especially like players that were in bands, like the session guys. I didn't know much about until I went to Berkeley.
Gotcha.
Like Freddie Washington. I was a huge Freddie Washington fan. Marcus Miller. I didn't realize I knew Marcus Miller's work until I got to Berkeley.
Right.
And also at Berkeley, I was in the Tower of Power ensemble. So I was a huge Rocco Prestia fan.
Yeah.
Huge. And I think a lot of my technique comes from that because, I had to shed a lot. I had to do a lot of like left-hand muting.
Right.
And, I find myself doing like when I get asked to play more funky stuff, I do a lot of like, muted stuff with my left hand. So, so Rocco, but also a big hero of mine. One of my favorite bass players still is Tim LaFay. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm so grateful to be his friend, and we're good friends, and he's continuing to kick ass and take names, and he's all about reinventing himself, and he's all about being his own artist, his own player. I love that. I love fearless musicians. It's great to be able to mold yourself into another player, for a gig. But there's something to be said about having your own voice on your instrument. And that's something he definitely has. And that's something that most of those bass players have. They have their own voice in their instrument, from their instrument. It's an extension of themselves. And, that's what turns me on, with all those players.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you liked more band guys in bands, because I think in a band you have more freedom to have your own voice versus being a sideman where you're sort of emulating a record that might have been made, or even if you made the record, you're emulating that, or you're sort of at the mercy of somebody else's art, whereas bands, it's like, what do you have to say? That's what makes a band, Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I miss that. I feel like in the future, I'm going to do a lot more original stuff for that reason. Mm-hmm. I think, being a full-time freelance bass player, again, I'm playing a whole bunch of different styles with random people. I just never know where the next gig is going to come from. As much as it's a gift, and I'm grateful for the experience, I do need to remind myself that, there was a part of me that wanted to have the artistry in my playing. I wanted that experience. So, I hope to do more of that in the future.
Yeah, well, you've been in a couple of my favorite bands, actually. So I guess we should just talk about it. We
Sure.
can start with Five for Fighting.
Yeah.
One of my favorite. It's not really a band though. Really,
It's John Ondrasik. Yeah.
yeah, it's John. But how was that experience?
Well, that was definitely a pivotal moment for me. Because I didn't even expect to get that audition. I got that through a friend of mine, Paul Ill. He's a bass player. He did a lot of work with Linda Perry and a whole bunch of other bands. He met me at the Kibitz Room Jam, and he sat me down and he's like, "Hey, Jen, what do you want to do with what do you want to do?" And at that time I was still married, so I said, I want to see the world before I have my kids. And then he was like, "Well, you should definitely do that." And then this other guy on the other side, he was just like, "No, have your kids. It's not worth it." And Paul was like, "How dare you say that to her?" And then, so like they had it out. Like, one guy was like a former, executive, and then, Paul is just like, letting him have it. And then a couple of months later, he left a message, and he told me that Five for Fighting's looking for a bass player, and we all think that it has your name written all over it. And I got the audition, and I don't remember a time where I prepared more for an audition. Like, I transcribed it. The music definitely spoke to me. John's music and his voice and the messages in his music definitely, connected with me. And the bass lines were just gorgeous.
Yeah.
So, when I got that audition, it was a huge shift in my career out here for sure, because I think a lot of people were auditioning, and it kind of put my name in the map, out here.
Yeah.
But yeah, John is amazing. He's just a brilliant man. He does a lot for different charities, and his family is just so, they're just so warm and kind. And it was a great experience traveling with them and doing all these shows, and playing with Randy is awesome. Randy Cook.
Oh yeah.
And Charlie Paxson and it's just
monster drummers.
It's just a great experience. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the other band that I think I've told you before, but like Vertical Horizon is one of my that first record, that Everything You Want, is probably one of my top 5 favorite records of all time.
Huge. Yeah.
And you were in that band for a while as well.
Yes, several years. And I didn't even audition for that gig. It just kind of, my ex was in that band, and, I got to know Matt. And I remember one day we were hanging out, where was it? Norm's Music, right? It's the guitar.
Right. Yeah.
And we were just jamming, and Matt and I have a lot of similar. We have similar taste in music. Like, he loves Kate Bush, he loves Rush, he loves Maiden. So we were always like kind of back and forth with all these songs that we loved and stuff. And I went to we were just like testing out guitars and basses, and I was just kind of jamming with him. And then a couple months later, so this is a great story, because it really didn't have much to do with my ex. It had something to do with a drummer named Ryan Brown.
Oh.
And so
from Denver, actually.
Is he from Denver? Right. I didn't know that.
You mean the Dweezil Zappa?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's originally from Denver, where I'm from.
I didn't know that. Oh, God. Yeah, he's an amazing drummer and a great friend. And he's also a huge Rush fan, right?
Yeah, right.
So he went to the Rush show, and Matt was sitting right next to him. And they just started talking, and Ryan mentioned that I just got the Five for Fighting gig. And then, and then shortly after that, like, Matt's girlfriend was like, you you got the gig? That's amazing. That's amazing. So I think that's what made him see me as a professional,
Right. Yeah.
instead of the wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ended up asking me to do a gig in Denver, Colorado, and gave me like, oh God, I think it was like 20 songs or something.
Wow.
And and it was luckily I knew all the songs in my head, and it was
right.
The cramming was just a lot of fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I had, there was no audition, there was no rehearsal. We'd go to sound check and there's all these tech issues. Like we can't even get sound on stage. We're using in-ears. You know how it is with the in-ears.
Yeah.
There's always these problems. And then, and I remember I had like a little cheat sheet, on the side where I was like, okay, just in case, I need something. And I left it in the trailer. And I started panicking once I got, actually the first song I played with Matt was on the gig, like not at the sound check. It was right when we started to play.
Wow.
And it was amazing because, at that point, I don't know if you've ever had a situation like that, but it's like you're definitely in the hot seat. You have to deliver. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, you don't want to fuck it up. You don't want to screw up. And, you want to make a good impression. And, there I am just kind of panicking that I don't have this cheat sheet. And then it just kind of occurred to me, well, you're already on stage. You might as well just have fun with it and don't stress.
Right.
And I did. And it was awesome. It was just such a joyous show. And Matt is an incredible guy, another great guy. And, I got to travel to Guantanamo Bay with him and with the troops. And
that's crazy.
We did a symphony show in Waikiki. Mm. A lot of really great experiences with Matt too. He's still a dear friend. And
that's I have nightmares like that on the reg. even during this COVID when I'm not even working, I've been having these stress dreams of like, I get to the stage and I forgot to learn all the songs, no matter like it'd be any kind of gig. But that's
I think we both had that situation with Air Supply, didn't we?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When I got called to sub for them, because that was kind of a weird situation actually, because I was subbing for Derek and then the Dwight gig came up that I've played now. So I had to sort of jump off and you got the call to sub for me, subbing for Derek. So I'm sure the pressure was worse on you because I had a lot more time to learn the songs.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, because I probably knew for a good 6 weeks before the gig, and I feel like you got the call like a week and a half or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
the whole situation was awful. I felt really bad about it, but
it was the week of, I think, or like a week ago, a week prior.
Yeah.
And actually Vertical was the same way. It was
oh wow,
I think it was a week prior.
And that's just how it happens, a lot of times. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, for sure.
But this recent time that I just subbed with Air Supply again in January, and I had like the charts on my iPad, but I had once again like memorized everything, and I was just gonna not use them and go out and challenge myself and impress myself. And I had them in my suitcase, but I was like, for the sound check, we just played and we did a couple of songs and it was all good. And then Aaron McLean, the musical director, he goes, "Oh, you're not going to use any charts?" And I was like, I just panicked all of a sudden. Like, I know all this material, I've once again spent like 2 weeks just learning it and memorizing it. But just the idea that it was like, just that challenge in my head, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get my charts anyways, just in case.
Right.
Like, you totally psyched me out. But, and that's a weird, it's a hard show. It's not, they don't play their music like the records, there's a lot of stuff to know in that Air Supply show.
Yeah, there's some details in those arrangements for sure. And then they have us going out in the front of the stage too.
Right. Exactly.
It's our moment, right? We have choreography.
Exactly. Yeah.
We go to stage right and then center stage and
yeah. And you're like, oh, glad I learned this one. Like dragging my charts behind me. It's not going to work. You know? Oh, man. Yeah. That was a fun gig, though.
Yeah, I love that gig. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, you know, I was going to mention, too, that Sean Hurley was the original Vertical Horizons bass player, right? Another Berkeley guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he just, last I heard, he was playing with John Mayer, right?
Yes, he is. What's really funny is that I ended up on a gig with Sean. My Fleetwood Mac, one of the symphony shows, the Fleetwood Mac one, he played bass.
Oh, crazy. Oh, that's
cool. I got to sing all the Stevie stuff.
Oh, so, funny. Yeah, I was going to bring that up earlier, actually, because as far as us hanging out and talking, it's like we're bass players, so there's never two bass players on a gig. Like bass players we don't hang that much because we're never on the gig together, you know?
Yeah.
But there you go. Sometimes it happens.
Yeah, and actually there's been a couple of other times that's happened too, where, you know, I do a lot of lead singing and like some MD work.
Right.
And, yeah, it's always great to bass players are my favorite musicians. I mean, they're just so fun and they just got the best personalities. And I don't know. I think we're lucky to be bass players.
I think so. Like I said, I was bitter about it earlier in this interview, but now I'm coming around to it again. I think I'm. Yeah. And another gig that we did that I only did it once, but I think you've done it a bunch is the Peter Asher extravaganza. I don't even know what to call it. It's like it was the coolest, craziest show I'd ever seen. But it was another situation, just like you described Vertical Horizon, where I met him about 3 songs into the show.
Right.
Like we started playing, he comes on, does 3 songs. And then there's a multimedia thing where the video is playing and he came over to me. He's like, "Hey man, how's it going? I'm Peter." I'm like, "Hi, how's it going? I'm Eric." And then the show ended. He left the stage and I never even got to talk to him or anything really. So, but it's kind of amazing. Like I think of him as like the Forrest Gump of rock and roll. He was just everywhere in this, like the history of pop music in a weird way. And then he talks about it for 3 hours and that's his show, you know, and then you play a couple of songs in there.
He's quite the Renaissance man of rock. And I had a similar experience where I met him on stage at the Cutting Room when he did his show, and it was the same thing. And I don't know about you, but I was mesmerized by all of the images and the videos. You know, just hearing, you know, Paul McCartney sing "World Without Love" with just him and his acoustic, and seeing the napkin with his writing on it. It was just. There were so many surreal moments about his show that I was kind of panicking because I wanted to stay focused on my next cue.
Right.
But I was like turning around like, wow, this is cool. I didn't know this. I didn't know that he was such a part of so many people's careers. Yeah. And what's amazing is that every show he adds something different. There's always something new. You know, even, you know, now he's like in his upper 70s and he's got this, you know, Sirius XM radio show for about the Beatles called From Me to You. And it's huge. And he just published a book, The Beatles A to Z. And you know, he just received. He's a commander of the British, whatever.
British stuff.
Yeah, British stuff. But he's just everywhere. And you know, he started with Peter and Gordon in the early '60s, and you know, his act was one of the first to play the Sullivan Show.
Wow.
Incredible. And then he went to be the CEO of Apple Records, discover James Taylor, and become, you know, Linda Ronstadt's manager and producer, and, you know, skyrocket her career. And he did that with so many other artists. And it's just really surreal, you know. I look at him as a guy that just proves that you could constantly reinvent yourself in this business. You know, you don't always have to just play one instrument. You don't always have to be an artist. You could go on the other side. You could produce. You could manage, and you could be a publisher. You could publish a book, and you could have a podcast. You know,
right.
It's such a, you know, it's really amazing to have this time where we could really sit and figure out what our next move is going to be.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are scrambling now. People don't know when their next gig is going to be. And, you know, it's, you know, when you see someone like Peter, he figured out a way. You know, he's got his show. You have this podcast. You know, a lot of people are doing creative things now. It's really,
and I wouldn't really have the time or the energy or the opportunity to do this without this big pause. So you grew up in Brooklyn.
Yep.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Sheepshead Bay.
How do you think that influenced your musicality growing up in like the center of the universe, you know? Like New York City is such a cool, that's where all the cool stuff comes from.
Yeah. Well, Brooklyn, where I grew up, it was a little bit further away from Manhattan, you know, New York City, as they call it. And I was a self-taught bass player. I ended up, you know, like they say, you know, teach someone to play a C, and you play a C, and the next week teach someone a G, and then all of a sudden you have a gig. You know, it was kind of like that. I just ended up, you know, just using my ears, and things just started picking up. You know, it was just like one of these things that it was like, oh, cool, I'll do this. It was a lot of fun, and it just there was this instant magnetism between me and the bass. Like I played a lot of other instruments prior to that, but something about the bass just you know, it was just like this gravitational pull. You know.
Wow,
then,
very cool.
You know, and sure enough, I was, you know, what used to be a hobby became, you know, my profession. So.
Wow. So you never sort of had this epiphany of, I'm going to be a professional musician. It just sort of happened.
Well, it actually did happen when I was burning the candle at both ends. I had a day job. I was working in the city, and I was up for a promotion, and, you know, I was definitely qualified, you know, let's just put it that way. And because I was always working at night, I was kind of over, you know, compensating. I was, you know, working even harder just to prove that I can do it all, you know, trying to be the superwoman. And, you know, they told me that in order to get this promotion, I would have to quit music, you know, quit my gigs, you know, because it would be more demanding. And I lied, and I said, you know, I would do it for this job. And sure enough, you know, they gave it to someone else. And I was like, okay, well, that's my cue.
Wow.
I'm getting out of here. And then sure enough, you know, it was Independence Day weekend. And I remember, because I was like, yo, I'm free at last, you know, and sure enough, that was kind of like my calling. Like all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm applying for Berklee. I'm going to, you know, cash in my 401k. I'm going to, you know, make this happen. And yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
It's nice when those big decisions are made for you in a way, you know?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah. In that circumstance, it definitely worked in my favor for sure.
And you were always playing music? Were you a musical kid? And
yes. My mom, she just has this natural ability, and my grandfather, he died before I was around, but you know, he had his own orchestra. And there was always instruments in the house. So, you know, I would end up just picking up different instruments and figuring it out. And I went from violin to piano to drums and clarinet, and bass kind of came around a little later.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of find that like most bass players, it wasn't necessarily the first choice. Like a lot of times you're just like, well, there's no one else who's going to play the bass, so you got to do it. Or, you know, like, but it sounds like you kind of started like that, but then you took a liking to it.
Well, yeah, I always loved groove. You know, I you know, some of my first gigs, I was a drummer. I was a drummer in a glam punk band, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of lugging, like a lot of stuff to carry, and I'd get all sweaty at the end of the night, and it was like, I should do something different, and I think I think it was I was dating some guy, and he was a bass player, and I picked up the bass, and I was just like, I just figured it out. It was just one of those things that was just so intuitive,
right? Right. That's interesting. Yeah, well, knowledge of the drums is pretty vital for a bass player. So I'm kind of the same way. I started on drums and went to bass, and I think that's helped me as a bass player immensely. Because obviously, that's our job, is just to be with the drums,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I always say I'm just a frustrated drummer. I'm kind of a reluctant bass player, really, because I call it my day job, really, but I always wanted to be the guy with the guitar at the front of the band singing, not the dude in the back just laying down the low notes. But
you're also a singer, though,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. So I worked it out eventually, but but I don't know. There was something more rock and roll about playing guitar.
Just too much work for me. But what's really funny is that during this quarantine, that's what I've been doing. I've been playing more guitar than anything else, because now I have the time,
right? Yeah, and that's cool.
Yeah, and also we have to figure out a way to perform, and I'm not one of those people that just feels comfortable, like, oh, look at me playing a groove, like, look at me playing this,
right.
Especially since I've done a lot of cover gigs, so I've been using this opportunity to kind of brush up on my keyboard skills and my guitar skills. And I did a couple of quarantine shows, and,
that's cool.
It's humbling. It's humbling to try to do it all. You see a lot of our friends are they're taking some chances, and it's working. It's working.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I was just scrolling through Facebook before we started, and it's Friday night, and so many people do their shows on Friday night. So now it's like, instead of bar hopping, you're just Facebook hopping from one performance to the next. It's kind of cool. I mean, I don't if that's something positive that can come out of all of this, then that's great.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a way to continue connecting with people, and again, it's a way to start tapping into other skills that you might not have had the time to work on in the past.
Right, like being a podcast host.
Yeah, this is awesome. Awesome.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm a good editor. How about that?
Oh, good.
And then you mentioned you went to Berkeley, like I did.
Oh yeah. When did you go?
I was there 91 to 93.
Awesome.
And did you like it there?
I loved it. And it was also another humbling experience. I went a little later because I told you I had a day job prior to it.
Right.
And I went, and I made sure I took some lessons before I went. I met with this guy, Patrick Pfeiffer, in New York, in the Upper West Side, and I took, I think, 3 or 4 lessons with him, and just to get an idea of what to expect.
Right.
And I went, and it was so much fun. It was so much work, so humbling. And it was just a really beautiful experience, being just totally immersed in music and all styles, and just learning a whole bunch of different skills. Again, sight reading and all that. And, Latin and what else? And, walking bass lines, understanding jazz in a deeper way,
Yeah, it's a great school, and Boston's such a great town too. Lots of good music there.
Who are your teachers?
Oh man, it's been so long now. Danny, he played in the Calypso band, Calypso Hurricane. He was my favorite guy. I can't
Danny
remember.
Morris?
Yes,
Danny Moe?
Danny Moe. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, he was great too. The first day I walked in, he pulled out a book of a bunch of James Jamerson transcribed, bass lines, and I was like, okay, this is going to work. This is going to be great. This is exactly what I want to be learning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that book.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So great. Before that, I had the older dude. I'm not going to remember. But he was more of a classical upright guy. James Rapucci. Is that
Rapucci. Yeah.
Yeah. He was my first teacher. And it was a little more serious, and I don't know. I didn't feel like I was getting as much out of that as learning applicable stuff like James Jamerson, you know.
You were a student, right? Did you take lessons?
I mean, those are my lesson teachers.
Yeah, but prior to that, like, did you study bass before you went to Berklee?
Not really. Like I played bass in jazz band at my high school, and I was always the guy that no one else would do it, so I always ended up playing bass. Like I was kind of talking about. So, I didn't really enjoy practicing, so I learned to read, so then I could just show up and play, you know, because I was playing keyboards or I was playing guitar or whatever else I wanted to do. So by the time I got going to Berklee, it was like, well, the instrument I can read the best on is the bass. So if I'm going to have as good a shot as I can, I might as well stick to that, you know? So it wasn't even until probably 2 years after Berklee that I finally committed to being, okay, I'm a bass player. I'm just going to start calling myself that. I'm going to buy a good bass, you know? But I sort of, I don't know, backed into it reluctantly, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. For me, I just love the connectivity of it. At first I didn't want to be in the spotlight. I kind of liked being in the back, hidden with the drummer and just kind of feeling the time and connecting with the other people on stage. I've always been a bit of a nervous communicator. Like I've just always been a little bit self-conscious. So it was kind of my way of communicating, just being on stage and connecting musically with these people.
Yeah. And the bass definitely has like a job to do. I think that's what makes it a little less fun. It's something I enjoy now. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 years now. So, you know, what are you going to, you definitely connect to things. And I enjoy the job of the bass. But when I was a kid and I had so much I thought I wanted to say, having to do, you know what I mean? Like the bass has a job. I have to play the downbeat. I have to play the bass line. Whereas a guitar player, they can, I'm going to do this on this chord now, or I'm going to, you know what I mean? There's more creative spaces in the band. So for me, I was just like, I have to do this. You know what I mean? Yeah, now I appreciate it.
Yeah. There's definitely a nurturing quality in being a bass player that you don't tend to have as like a guitar soloist. You know, right. I think, maybe a rhythm guitar player would have a little bit more of a nurturing quality, but yeah, it's a whole personality thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think so. You got to be a leader of sorts and hold it down. You hold it down while everyone else gets to play, you know? I don't know. Yeah. I sound bitter about it. I have a happy life. I really do.
Oh, you're awesome. You're awesome. Yeah.
I'd like to take a second to thank you for listening to the Dive Bar Rockstar podcast. As a new podcast, getting the word out is a vital part of what it takes to keep the show on the road, or off the road, as the current case may be. If you would like to support the podcast, all you got to do is subscribe wherever you listen. And if you have an extra minute or two, please leave a review. You can also share and follow the podcast on your social media apps. Okay, enough begging. I hope you're having fun, and once again, thank you for listening. Wow, so how long after Berklee did you end up here?
Okay, so let's see. I think it was 6 years later, 5 or 6 years later, after I graduated. I was one of those people who graduated because, I took my GED. Like I didn't, I didn't complete high school. Like I got my, diploma. And, it was kind of like a sore subject for me. It was kind of like unfinished business where, I wanted to make sure I finished.
Right.
And did my time, So, when I got my degree, I have to say, I was very exhausted, and I was a little bit, I have to admit, I was a bit discouraged because there was so much information thrown at me and
Mm.
so much I wanted to absorb that I couldn't at the time. Um, and my life was kind of going into a different place personally. So I was just kind of figuring, okay, I'll get another day job and do my weekend warrior stuff. And that worked for several years until, you know, like you say, the universe does for you what you don't want to do for yourself.
Right.
You know, I just felt very drawn to make a move. You know, I was very drawn to go to LA. I had some friends out there, out here. Um, and yeah, I made that conscious decision.
That's cool. And you like it?
I love it. You know, basically, you know, I hate to skate around it because it's such a big part of my life. But you know, I was married, and I was married to another musician, and you know, we had this duo that we would play out in Boston, all over, you know, like Quincy Market and, you know, Faneuil Hall,
Right.
and we played this place, the Barking Crab, and right on the water, and it was really great. We had a residency every weekend, you know, Friday through Sunday, and then we had our day jobs, and it was very comfortable. But it got to the point where I needed something different, and I started writing my own music. You know, we built a studio, and then I had a full length album that I wanted to finish, and you know, like I think a lot of people do with their first recording project, they overproduce themselves.
Right.
So then, you know, by that time, I just kind of exhausted that idea and decided to do something else. And then, you know, my husband at the time, he had the friends out in LA that, you know, he was going to visit. And actually I did too. I forgot about this because we stayed at my friend's house. And that first day we were there, one of them gave me a script, a screenplay, and she had us read it. And then we went to Gladstone's in Malibu. Right. And we read the script, and then like I just started hearing things. I just started hearing, you know, music and cues and everything. And when we went back, I was just kind of telling her, well, you know, we could do this, we could do that. And then all of a sudden I had a scoring gig.
Wow.
So then I was just like, okay, this is where I need to be. The universe is calling, you know? So we went back to Boston, and I wrote about 2 hours worth of scoring material. And, you know, eventually we went back to LA. You know, I was thinking that we were going to continue with this project. And sure enough, they ended up having, you know, the budget was too high to do that movie, but they did a smaller budget film, which I wrote music for. So it was pretty exciting to kind of jump into that world so quickly. You know, it was kind of like, you know, that aha moment. Oh, divine intervention hit, you know, the first day, all of a sudden I got work.
Yeah.
Or like the idea of work. Let's just put it that way. Because, you know, you learn really quickly out here that people say stuff and then you just don't know until it actually happens, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest differences from New York to LA. LA's a lot of talking. It's not so direct, you know. People say stuff. They don't necessarily lie about stuff. It's just a way laid back, like, yeah, man, things are gonna happen.
Yeah, let's have coffee sometime.
Yeah.
Let's go for a hike. Yeah.
Right. That means we're never going to go for a hike.
Yeah.
We're never going to get coffee.
Never.
But if I need you, I'm going to call you. And then once in a while the phone rings and you're like, oh, wow, I just scored big, you know? So were you a film scoring major at Berkeley?
No, it was just another thing that just kind of fell in my lap. It was just it just happened so suddenly. And it was really fun. You know, I'd like to do more of that in the future.
Yeah. Well, you've done all these big orchestration gigs, like these orchestra symphony tributes and stuff. How did you get into all that? I mean, you obviously have those skills. Is that stuff that you learned at Berkeley, or?
No, it's another thing that just kind of fell in my lap.
Wow.
I was working on a TV show, a Mexican TV show for several years. And it was one of those, moments. I have a lot of these moments where I'm just done with something. It's like I took it as far as I could take it. So I had to kind of, leave that job and decompress. And I took a month off, and I spent that month on my birthday gig. And for my birthday, I wanted to do a show, a tribute to Kate Bush and Susie and the Banshees.
And, yeah, I was there.
Yeah, I remember. So through that, I ended up learning how to score through finale, because there was a lot of string parts, and I wanted to make sure everyone got their charts and stuff, so they didn't have to do all that work, So that was my first intro to scoring and arranging and orchestration. And from there, I ended up working in some orchestral tributes with a friend of mine, Dan Kalisher. I think you know Dan, right?
I don't know him.
And his wife Alicia, and we ended up talking, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we're doing this other tribute to Fleetwood Mac, and I know you're a big fan. Would you like to come on board?" And then I started talking with the guy that was managing this and kind of producing this. And eventually he asked me if I would want to score it. It was just so random. It was really random. And prior to that, I only did one other orchestration, and it was for the Wild Honey Autism Think Tank benefit. And it was the music of the Beach Boys. So I did all the horn arrangements for that, or I should say just, transcribed the horn arrangements for them. So it was a huge shift in my career, for sure, because, there I was sitting at home every day, just kind of transcribing and listening and absorbing all these details. And it was amazing. And, I was writing for a 50-piece orchestra, and,
that's crazy.
It was pretty insane.
That's crazy to just jump into. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal when I think about it, how that all kind of came together, because from that, I ended up, working with Nelly on this like hip hop symphony show. Wow. And then a whole bunch of others. Like I worked with Wyclef Jean, and cool. that was the hugest, that was like so much work because Clef, he writes like a DJ, and we did several working sessions through FaceTime, and they were like 5 to 6 hours long. Wow. And originally I think I was commissioned to do 18 songs, but what I didn't know was in those 18 songs there was going to be mashups and medleys. Yeah. so like there were a couple like real huge experiences. Like I had to do like a 4 song medley, and it got crazy because a lot of his stuff has really tricky rhythms and arrangements and stuff, and it was really exciting though. He's such a fun guy. And he's so charismatic and inspiring,
Yeah. Well, your birthday gig was awesome. I haven't seen these others, but if it was anything like that, and that was kind of amazing too, because Kate Bush is such a intimate music, and it was at Molly Malone's at this bar, and tons of people there. But there were moments when you could hear a pin drop, like it was going over so well. I mean, it was full of a lot of musicians too, so we tend to know how to listen better than normal drunk people, I guess. But it was really amazing. I thought it was so cool.
Thank you. It was definitely a labor of love. And it was just one of those, again, like it was, the planets aligned, and it just kind of moved my career in a different place. I'm sure you could relate to that, right?
Yeah. I've gone from smooth jazz to country. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, right. That's a sweet gig you've got, though. When there's not a quarantine, there's a lot of work there.
Yeah. Yes, Dwight likes to work for sure. So I have no complaints. It's a great gig. And I do a lot of singing, which is kind of more what I dreamed of doing in the first place. So it's kind of me and Dwight just singing harmonies all night. So it's a really fun gig. But again, sometimes when I wake up and I'm like, how did I get here? This is amazing.
Well, it definitely, it was meant to be,
Yeah.
And what's really, I love this. Thank you for inviting me to do this, because I remember, you and I get called for a lot of the same gigs in town.
Right.
I remember it took years before I actually met you. And I think I've called you a couple of times to sub or,
yeah. And vice versa.
Yeah, we both get called for being those singing bass players. And
exactly. There's not a lot of them in town, believe it or not, So it's a good couple of skills to have.
Definitely.
Yeah.
A lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't get paid twice as much. That's kind of the crock of it all.
But it's also about keeping it fresh too for me. Like I kind of like to keep it fun and keep it challenging.
Yeah, well, obviously, you're willing to just jump in and write for an orchestra. That's pretty awesome. I'm just so intimidated by that, and I love string parts, and I do a lot of strings in my studio on when I'm producing tracks. But I've never quite had the balls yet to like hire an orchestra and actually do it. So I don't know why it's so intimidating to me, but I commend you for jumping in. I don't know, it's pretty amazing.
I appreciate that. It was definitely surreal.
Yeah. So you mentioned also the show that you were on. Let me see if I get it right. Noches Con Platanito.
Platanito, yes.
Sí. I watched. I spent a good hour or so watching it online.
Oh my God.
So crazy.
Yes, it is.
And I don't speak Spanish, so a lot of it was just over my head. But but also they do all these weird skits, and it's basically hosted by a guy in a clown suit.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it is sort of visual humor that you don't. Do you speak Spanish?
No.
So I don't know. Was it a fun show to make? It looks totally nuts.
It was complete insanity. And what's really hilarious is that I got that gig through a salsa band that I still play with, but originally the name was La Salsa Divas, and now it's Las Chicas. Okay. So I was all about playing salsa, and with these salsa gigs, we also play a lot of cumbias, which is Mexican style. And we get called to do this audition. No one told us what it is, but we knew it was a TV show, and we auditioned with some salsa, like we know, some Celia Cruz, and then we're like, okay, what else do you know? And we're like, okay, we played a cumbia. It's like, hey, do you know any pop tunes? And I was the only American pop girl, so. So, I ended up kind of helping the band kind of figure out something, like a Beyonce tune. And Crazy in Love, that's what we did.
Oh, yeah.
And we ended up getting the gig. And then Crazy in Love ended up being the theme song.
Oh, that's crazy.
For the show. Yeah, and it was pretty bizarre. But what's more bizarre than that is that the musical director could not speak English when I first got the gig.
Oh,
so
wow.
When he was telling us, he was giving us cues. He was saying everything in Spanish. And instead of telling us to play a C or a B or an A, he would say it in solfege.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And he would say it in Mexican solfege, right? Or Spanish solfege, right?
Right.
So whenever he would say La, I would play A, Sol, I would play G, but then he would say C, and then I would play C.
Right.
But he meant B.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so I learned it as being T-I, but he calls B S-I-C.
Interesting. So that messed everything up.
Oh, it was just so embarrassing. I mean, the whole thing was extremely humbling, and everything was sight reading. And this guy, he would, we did a lot of banda music, which is this really crazy, almost feels lopsided music with a whole bunch of horns and a trombone and a tuba, and he gave me all these tuba parts, and everything was written like an octave, at least an octave above where I should be playing it.
Right.
So to sight read that, on command was very stressful.
Yeah.
But eventually over the years, we started getting it a little bit. We started being able to communicate better. He started learning English. I started learning more Spanish.
Right.
And then we kind of modified those parts. But yeah, it was definitely such a learning experience, to say the least. It's crazy. It was crazy. And then you'd have pies being thrown in every direction, basketballs, just random things.
Yeah. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was amazing. I'm like, give me another episode. I don't even know what I'm looking at. This is just insanity, but it was awesome.
Well, can you imagine how it felt to stand there and listen to all these interviews and not know a word they're saying? But what's really funny is that their mannerisms are so big. Like, they were just so expressive that you could get an idea.
Right.
Get an idea of what they were saying. Yeah. So by the end of it, by the 6th year, I definitely understood a lot more than I could speak.
Right. That's cool. Yeah, I did spend 12 years on the road with Keiko Matsui, being surrounded by Japanese all the time. So I'm kind of familiar, but at least she spoke enough English, that we could communicate. But there was a lot of, especially in Japan. One time we went on this Japan tour, and she decided that she wanted to give this, like maybe the 4th song in, she gave about a 3-minute speech, all in Japanese. And 3 minutes when you're standing on stage in front of 1,500 people, that's a long time. It feels really long when you don't understand what they're saying at all, or what she's saying. So I guess I could relate a little bit, but what a cool show. So did you prefer that necessarily to being on the road, or did you like the TV work? Are you still it's not on anymore, right?
It just finished. The last season was last fall, but I think that the show is still on Estrella TV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's still on at 9:00 every night. They
That's
just
cool.
do a lot of reruns. But yeah, I prefer touring. I prefer pop music. I learned a lot from that experience. It's definitely a gift to be able to, jump in and play a lot of different styles on command. But, I felt like, where I personally feel more comfortable is through, pop music and stuff I grew up listening to, more organic music. Not to say that if another TV gig came around, I would jump for the opportunity,
right?
Right. Because especially if it's American pop, because I'm definitely a lot more versed in that. But it's always been a dream of mine to travel the world and be in a band. I've always wanted that camaraderie and that connection with a band, and it's been great though. I mean, I've had a little bit of that experience as well, and I'm grateful.
So do you write your own music? Like, do you consider yourself a songwriter as well?
Well, yeah, I've written, I had a full-length record that I was going to release in, I guess it was 2004. And that was back in Boston. But once I moved out to LA, my career kind of, shifted to more the sideman kind of position.
Right.
And I did start writing with Fernando Perdomo of Echo in the Canyon. I guess people would know him mostly from that, but he's an amazing multi-instrumentalist and producer. And yeah, we had a couple of singles out a couple of years ago under the name Records and Tapes. And so I'm pretty sure we're going to start writing again in the future, and I'm looking forward to that.
That's cool. Yeah, I checked out. Was it hard to
believe?
Hard to believe. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Like super melodic, and you guys' voices really cool together.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that whole project came about through our mutual love for Kate Bush as well, which was hilarious. Yeah. When I met him, we both were wearing Kate Bush t-shirts. What are the odds that would happen? And it was at the Kibitz Room again.
Wow.
So he was like, I got to work with you. So we ended up writing this song in like 40 minutes or something. And Fernando, just his style, like we write the song and he's posting on Facebook. Like that, like 2 seconds later, like, oh wow. My God, the song, you wouldn't believe it. And then 3 weeks later, we have our first gig, and I'm like, Fernando, how are we going to do this? We only have one song, but by the end of it, we ended up having a full set.
Right. Wow. You can just fill it in with Kate Bush songs.
Yeah. Actually did a cover of Feel It. But most of it was definitely original stuff.
Oh, wow. So you just started writing and.
Yeah. It was very stressful though, I got to say. But it was a great exercise,
right.
Just getting it done. And I look forward to doing more of that in the future for sure.
Sure, if I can count on you when times get tough and you grow tired of this view, would you have a heart or would you fall apart? Baby, tell me, is it really worth taking a chance on you?
And when you're writing, are you writing on bass or your guitar or keyboards or?
It comes from many different sources. With Fernando, I think he was playing guitar, and I just kind of, started thinking about melodies, and
cool.
and then I think I went to the piano. I'm very comfortable with just progressions on piano, more so than the guitar. But, I do play a little bit of guitar as well. And then, at this point, I haven't really started a song with a bass line, but, that is something that I'd like to do in the future for sure.
Right.
It's weird because, it seems that, I go to different things for different reasons. Like I love bass because of the connectivity, the instant connectivity I have with other players in the band. Mm-hmm. And then, I look to the keyboard or the guitar to create more,
mm-hmm.
To shape songs. I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know.
Well, I picked up the guitar again. Like I used to play guitar when I was a kid, and then I had spent 10 years playing the bass, and then I it's kind of a long story, but I was playing with Lee Ritenour, and we opened up for Kenny Loggins, and I was just like, I've been playing instrumental music for years, and I'm a singer, and it just inspired me to go buy a guitar and just start writing again. But as soon as you play an E chord, it's a different feeling than what you can do on bass. The bass is one note at a time. You don't have the depth of harmony, and it was just like, playing chords after playing bass for so long. I was like, I forgot about that feeling, I mean, they both have their reasons to exist. It's not like a judgment call, but it's just like when you're writing melodies and you have all that chordal stuff happening, it's a different experience.
Absolutely. And they have different functions. And I guess the Police is the perfect example of that, and a band like, yes, Chris Squire wrote a lot of that stuff. So, a lot of that was bass driven, I guess.
Right.
Rush, that stuff was very bass driven, and every instrumental, every part was equally important.
Right.
You know, and I would love to get into a situation like that in the future. You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because again, those are bands, and I think they're all sort of together writing those songs. So you have everything right there, but sitting in a room by yourself, it's like, well, how can I get the most notes out of something? You know, that's why keyboards works, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, and I find that when I write for someone else, it comes out a lot easier because I don't have like this personal connection to it as much. Like I get super critical to the point where, you know, it could stop me. It could like hinder my progress as a, you know, a writer.
Right.
So like, you know, when I did that movie and I had to write for that film, you know, the director gave me the concept. She gave me the setting, you know, what it's supposed to be about, and she told me what it's supposed to sound like, who she imagines would perform it. So, you know, I did a song that was very much like Peaches. I did another song that sounded a little bit like Avril, like, you know, so I was able to shape it towards that concept. And it was easier because, you know, I didn't have to get in the way of it, or I didn't feel the need to get in the way of it. You know?
Right. Yeah, that's really tricky.
Mm.
Yeah, it's tricky not to get caught up in your own stuff too. And I had a guy tell me once, like, don't ever write about anything personal. And then you listen to some of my favorite songwriters, and like, it's all personal, but I do think there's a balance. You know, I think if it gets too personal, it almost becomes like as a listener, you're like, I don't think I should be hearing about this. You know, this seems like, am I even in this conversation? You know?
Yeah, it becomes a bit of a confessional, right? So, you know, and I think that's where I get a little, you know, stuck too, because I am a very, you know, I am a very open person. You know, I'm a very, you know, I love vulnerable people. I love people who are honest about who they are, you know, and I would love to have that in my music, but I don't want it to be obvious. You know, I think there should be a creative kind of arc to it where, you know, you don't have to tell them everything about your story. You don't have to, you know, you got to make it somewhat relatable, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's cool. Well, we should probably write a song together sometime.
I would love that. Oh my God, that'd be so fun.
Yeah.
Well, you write too, right? So I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a few records out, and lately I've been, as soon as the gigs stopped, I just sort of happened on I don't want to say a publishing deal, but a publisher. I had got hooked up with a publisher who was looking for yacht rock songs. And so I did like 4 off just really quick, and it was so much fun to write that stuff because I love Michael McDonald and Hall & Oates and all that stuff. So that's probably the most recent stuff I wrote. It's not something I would put out necessarily, but so much fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's so melodic. There's so much rich harmonies in that music, and a lot of, like vocal harmonies, and you know, the chords are so rich, you know.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. And you get to play jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pop music. You know what I mean? So
Ambrosia were masters with that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Speaking of that, I played 2 gigs with Ambrosia because Joe Puerta, their bass player, had shoulder surgery.
Oh wow.
So I filled in for him, and he sang on the gig. He didn't play, but he sang, you know. And I love their hits, you know, but I didn't really know that much about them as a band. And you were talking about how you recently just did the prog rock thing legit. When I started learning those songs, I was like, what? I mean, the rest of their catalog is prog rock, you know, from hell. It's insane.
Totally.
You know, in like 13/8 into the 12/9. I don't even, you know, the fractions at the end of each bar are incredible, you know. So man, one of the hardest gigs. I thought I was like just going to be playing these great little smooth jazz rock, you know, yacht rock songs, but so much fun. But to add to it, there's Joe Puerta standing in front of me, you know, God, the whole night, just the guy who recorded these bass lines. And, you know, and we had done one Skype session together, and then we were supposed to do a sound check rehearsal. And of course they were like, well, you know, they want us to sound check at 1:00, but the gig's not till 8. So do you mind if we just move it back to like 6? And then I'm like, yeah, it's as long as we got time to go through the songs and stuff. He's like, yeah, we probably won't, but you'll be good, right? Like, sure. You know? So it was an experience, but oh my gosh, talk about, it's like they're deceptively, they're yacht rock, yes, but then the rest of their songs are just crazy prog rock. It's good stuff for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that definitely captures a time too in music where, people were more about more melodies and more challenging harmonies. That was the 70s, right? The mid 70s.
Yeah.
And I think Hall & Oates were pretty prog in the beginning too.
Yeah, definitely. Probably a little on the softer side of it, but lots of chords, lots of melodies. And like, that's my favorite stuff for sure. So having the opportunity to somebody asking me to write yacht rock, I'm like, hell yeah, I'll write yacht rock.
So cool. Actually, that was one of the gigs that I missed out on because of the quarantine. We were supposed to do this cruise. I forgot the name of the cruise. It was the Moody Blues Cruise.
Oh, cool.
And Fernando and I were going to do like this whole 70s thing, this whole yacht rock thing. And, it just kind of, it's coming back. I think, 70s music is totally making a comeback. I mean, for years it was all about the 80s, but now it's like 70s or the 90s.
Yeah. And if you have XM radio, they have a whole yacht rock channel that I used to have it. I let it expire recently, but I just couldn't get off that channel. Like I was just listening to yacht rock, 24/7. It's just So
actually, it's funny that you say that because I do these quarantine shows where on Facebook Live where I just play a bunch of requests and stuff, and the stuff that I really gravitate towards is the stuff like the Ambrosia, Nicolette Larson, Carly Simon, Carole King, and random stuff like the Orleans, but Robbie Dupree.
Yes. So when is your next Facebook Live show? Do you schedule these, or you just do them at random, or?
Well, lately it's been random, but I'm hoping to do a steady one on Friday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So, my East Coast family could watch it at 8 o'clock their time.
Right.
And I'm hoping that it'll become a weekly thing very soon.
Very cool. Well, it's probably our future. So
yes. It's really cool because I get to work on my guitar skills and my keyboard skills and stuff, and revisit stuff that I've always wanted to do. Like there was one time where I just kind of made it like a karaoke session where I just sang some of my favorite stuff, and I sang like a Barbra Streisand. Yeah, do you remember The Main Event?
Yes, the movie.
Yeah, The Main Event. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Totally, it's so much fun. I mean, that song is a ride. That song just takes you on like a roller coaster ride, and so I kind of make it fresh and silly and goofy, and I think that's the trick too, to have fun with it, make people smile and stuff and forget about things for a moment.
Do you have any great advice for the up and coming next bass player that's going to take our jobs?
I think it's I guess trust yourself and don't limit yourself to one thing. It's really, it's great to be open to any kind of opportunity. Just because you may not be comfortable doing something, if you get an opportunity, take it.
Right. That's
because you never know where it's going to lead you.
Right. So you sang for Linda Ronstadt, apparently.
Yeah. Well, this was through the Peter connection. So, Peter does a memoir, and, we were on tour a couple of months ago, and, in his memoir show, he talks about how he managed and produced Linda, and her documentary was, coming out shortly and after that. And she was also honored at the Kennedy Awards. And so he added a Linda song in the show. for me to sing, and I sang Blue Bayou. And
Oh, cool.
and then we went to San Francisco at a club called Bimbo's, I think it's 365, and she showed up.
Oh man.
So yeah. And they told me that she might. They told me she might, but they didn't say it while we were on stage. But I kind of had a feeling she was out there.
Right.
And, it was a pretty exciting experience for me. And I got to meet her afterwards, and it was just so surreal, such an honor. And she's such a sweet woman, and so smart and brilliant. And it was quite a memory. It was quite an experience I'm really grateful for.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really a great experience. I mean, it's one of those things that you never expect would happen.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm.
She's a legend. It's fun to bump elbows with legends for sure, and heroes,
Well, yeah, and I was like, on the stage with her manager and her producer,
right?
And who built, who discovered James Taylor.
Yeah.
It was just
surreal.
Do you have those moments when you're on stage, like?
Oh yeah.
When you see the people that you're working with, and you're like, oh my God, I remember when I listened to their record, 20 years, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine that you would be playing with them?
I know. Those are my favorite times. That's really why I keep doing this. There's a lot. It's a great life, obviously, and it's been really fun and it's turned out great, but it's a struggle as well. There's some need to have those moments that you're talking about. There's some pull towards just interacting with these people that inspires you so much. It makes it all worth it.
Yeah. And I don't know if you get this, but just when I think I'm out, it's kind of like that Al Pacino thing. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in again.
Yep.
I have these moments like, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the end of my career. Maybe there's nowhere else to go. And then sure enough, I get a phone call, or I get an email about something, or, someone remembers me from a couple of years back and, revisits some project that happened 15 years ago. You just never know. But, I feel like a part of, I think one of the things another thing I want to say is, or the advice I want to give is trust the universe.
Right.
It's like, see the signs, if you see that you have an opportunity, again, it's like, seize the opportunity. If you have that opportunity, go for it. It's a message. It's a blessing. It's not, it's a gift to be able to do what we do. And, we constantly need to be reminded of that too. Because if we're just by ourselves, there's no one else motivating us. Like, I'm here in this one apartment by myself, and it could get very lonely and very isolating very quickly. And, I could sit in my thoughts, way too long, and get really depressed about things.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I could, pick up the phone and call someone and then get deeply inspired. And then all of a sudden a song could come out of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was so great talking to you.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming on the show and telling us about yourself.
No, thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.
I'm a rock star.
Man, I got a lot out of that conversation. A lot to take in. That was so great. I hope that was enjoyable for everyone listening. I thought it was interesting, her wanting to be in a band and wanting to have a voice on the bass and expressing herself, because it's something I've sort of struggled with in my journey here on music. Because in the beginning, I was in bands. Everyone kind of starts that way. You're in high school, you're trying to find friends and people to play with, and getting like-minded people to get along for any sustained amount of time just always seemed way too challenging. For me, it's more like, I want a leader. Either I'm the leader and you're the sideman, or I'm a sideman and you're the leader. Either way works for me, but to have some sort of leadership is always, it works easier for me. But other people can't stand that model either, And obviously she's more into the band thing. And I think you have more of a say musically, obviously, if you're a band person versus, and that's not always true. There's a combination of the two things. There's artists that have bands, so they are a leader, but they still want to hear what you have to say. There's older bands like Chicago that only have a few original members. So there's other guys that are sidemen in that band, but they're in that band. But it's interesting. And I think being in a band is trickier. I think you're taking more of a risk financially in a way, because now you're trying to make this thing happen with your original music and having to sell that, trying to get signed, trying to get a following, versus being a sideman. A lot of times you're just jumping on the coattails of what someone else has done. So it's a little easier it's been easier in my experience to just make money, and to sustain myself financially. So I don't know. I think it's an important thing to find out about yourself and realize because it can shape your entire career. And I don't think that means you have to pick one or the other, because a lot of people might have a sideman gig that financially supports their band that they're in as well. And they can all work together. But I just think it's a good thing to know about yourself and what you prefer, so that you can navigate through this business in a way that's going to end up with you being happy and musically satisfied. Some things to clarify. She used the term shedding, which means to practice. The full term is wood shedding. And the story that I heard at Berklee, and if you have a different story, please email me at fanmail@divebarrockstar.com. But the story I heard was about Charlie Parker, and he started playing his instrument. He went to play some jams and do some gigs, and he was just horrible. So he went away and spent a whole year just hanging out in his wood shed, shedding, practicing, honing his skills, and then he came back and he was phenomenal. So if you never heard the term shedding or wood shedding, you can do that. I look it up, because I looked it up and I couldn't get a straight story, but that's the story I heard. Also, solfege, in case you don't know, is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is just another way of speaking music. And I was a little confused during the conversation, because she kept saying C and she would play a B. And there's also another C that is the sharp of so. So do, re, mi, fa, so. C would be a half step above so. So I was a little confused, but she meant C being confused with T, which would be a half step below the root, or, a major 7 above the root. So anyways, I was a little confused, but I listened back and now I get it. So hopefully you probably knew it the whole time. But anyway, also my teacher at Berklee was John Rapucci, and he was great. He's a great teacher. He's a great player. It was just not an awesome fit for me. And of course, cool stuff comes from all places, lots of places, not just New York City. I just really love it there. Well, I hope you guys had a great time.
I'm a dive bar rock star.
Wow, you've made it to the end. I'm hoping it's because you completely enjoyed yourself and are now filled with knowledge and inspiration to move forward with your dreams. If that is the case, and you would like to stay informed of new episodes, live events, and general news, please go to divebarrockstar.com and sign up for the mailing list. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, or complaints about anything you hear on the show, please email me at fanmail@divebarrockstar.com, and you may even end up on the show. We at the Dive Bar Rockstar podcast, with all of our hearts, thank you for listening, and remember, it's all about dreams.